you're thinking about getting pregnant, you want to be in the healthiest state possible. So it's important to go and visit your physician or your midwife to plan on how to have a healthy pregnancy.
We can help you optimize any health conditions that you may have. We can talk about getting your body healthy before starting a pregnancy.
And then even just mentally and emotionally preparing to make room for a child in your life.
During that visit, we can have multiple conversations, making sure that you are as healthy as possible prior to conception.
My doctor told me in order to prepare for getting pregnant to start implementing some more regular exercises in my routine.
So physical activity is very important. The healthier you are prior to conception, the better it is for the outcome of the pregnancy. It's very key that you maintain a well-balanced diet.
I made quite a few changes with my diet. I started making sure I brought more fruits and vegetables with me to work so that I was eating better during the day.
So lean meats, healthy fruits and vegetables, and nutritional development as well too with prenatal vitamins and ensuring that those are on board at least 3 months prior to conception.
But don't worry if you haven't done this and you find yourself pregnant and it wasn't a planned pregnancy. It's okay.
We're happy to work with you, and we'll get you started on the right path.
Are there any other circumstances when otherwise healthy foods might be harmful? Fact or fiction? Pregnant women should avoid peanuts to decrease their child's risk of peanut allergy. Fact or fiction? Where did anyone even get such an idea in the first place? From the American Academy of Pediatrics. But they're wrong. Says who? Says the American Academy of Pediatrics, who just reversed their position last year.
For many sick children, central venous catheters, or central lines, are lifelines. The tubes are entryways for critical nutrients or medicines. Threaded inside veins, they can deliver needed fluids and allow for frequent blood draws without needle pricks. But catheters can also be dangerous. Tubes can break, clots can form, and contamination is a constant worry. Here, we'll review the latest research on pediatric central lines, including placement, complications, and how to avoid infection. Depending on the need, catheters can stay in for a few weeks to months or years. They're inserted into the veins in the neck, arm, or groin, in the operating room, interventional radiology, or at the bedside. Regardless of where the central line is placed, the current standard of care is to use an ultrasound machine to guide placement. With this visual aid, fewer attempts are needed for successful insertion, and there are fewer complications. One complication of central lines is tube fracture. Internal tubing can snap if the catheter gets caught between the collarbone and the first rib, something called pinch-off syndrome. Although rare, this can block blood flow to the heart and requires immediate removal. Symptoms may include collarbone pain, numbness, tingling, weakness, or swelling in the arms, an irregular heartbeat, or extra resistance when trying to push fluids through the catheter. However, there may be no symptoms, so caregivers should be vigilant. The tubing on the outside of the body can also break. While this can usually be repaired, it can increase the risk of infection. Infections can be life-threatening. Because central lines involve placing tubes in blood vessels, an infection can quickly lead to sepsis. Unfortunately, these infections are common enough to have their own acronym, CLABSIs. At highest risk are children aged 3 or younger, those with low body weight, and kids or infants on long-term nutrition. The sugars, fats, and proteins flowing through catheters create perfect conditions for the rapid expansion of microorganisms. There are ways to reduce the risk of infection. During catheter insertion, doctors and nurses should make every effort to prevent contamination, including the use of a sterile gown, cap, and full body drape. A checklist should be used to make sure these precautions are followed. Prior to placement and during dressing changes, antimicrobial agents should be used to cleanse the skin. In neonates, however, be careful. Some agents can burn delicate skin, and iodine can harm developing thyroids. The end caps on central line tubes must also be scrubbed with an antiseptic before accessing the catheter hub. Children receiving lipids or blood products should have their tubing replaced within 24 hours, but otherwise, the tubing should not be changed more often than every 4 days. Catheters that are no longer necessary should be promptly removed. Finally, recent research suggests that ethanol locks are effective at battling the formation of biofilms, which are a source of infection inside the catheter tubing. Additional research may soon reveal whether ethanol can also be used therapeutically once a child develops a catheter infection. For now, the CDC recommends that hospitals use standardized protocols and dedicated multidisciplinary teams. By paying particular attention to central lines, kids won't get more catheter than they really need, and doctors and nurses will be able to protect and treat their tiniest patients.
In this video, we are going to cover eating disorders, and in particular, anorexia. First of all, what comes to mind when you think of an eating disorder? Pause the video and think about what an eating disorder means to you. You may not be aware of this, but 4 out of 10 people have either personally experienced an eating disorder or know somebody who has. So what exactly is an eating disorder, you may ask? An eating disorder is a psychological disorder, so a mental disorder, that causes somebody to adopt an unnatural attitude and approach towards food and their way of eating. The individual usually then develops an obsession about their weight and body shape, which in turn causes them to hurt their health as they make unhealthy choices about food. Even though there are many eating disorders, anorexia is probably the most well known, actually called anorexia nervosa, but usually referred to simply as anorexia. It's an intense fear of being fat that leads to restrictions in both the amount and/or the type of food that the person consumes. This particular eating disorder usually entails that the person is unable to see the reality of their body shape and situation, and sees their self-worth as being heavily linked to their body image. Eating disorders and anorexia may not seem too serious, and you may think that not a lot of harm can come out of this. However, anorexia is the psychiatric disorder that causes the most amount of deaths, and every 62 minutes one person dies as a direct result from an eating disorder. Death is usually caused either by suicide or as a result of organ failure, typically the heart, as the body lacks vital nutrients. So who can get it? Anyone can develop anorexia, but it's not, however, entirely clear why some people are more susceptible to it than others. There are, however, a number of factors that make a person more prone to falling into it. There are certain personalities such as perfectionists and character traits that a person may have that can increase their chances of becoming anorexic. If a family member has suffered from anorexia, then a person has a higher likelihood of developing it themselves. Furthermore, during times of stress, damaging family dynamics, or periods of time when a person may be experiencing social, cultural, and peer pressure, an individual is much more likely to have an onset of anorexia. Moreover, women and teenagers are more susceptible to developing eating disorders, which is why it is estimated that the average age in which people start to suffer from anorexia is 16 to 17 years old. However, it is not time or gender restricted. Anyone can be affected at any age. Anorexia is also not limited to certain countries or cultures. Anyone can be affected by the psychological disorder. If you or anyone you know is affected by this, remember there are always resources available and people willing to provide support. If you do need help, want to find out if you can help others affected, or simply want to learn more about what anorexia is, there are numerous websites available.
Getting kids to be more physically active has been a long-standing challenge for parents, teachers, and public health officials. In the last 40 years, researchers have tried to motivate children to be active, but the majority of these efforts have achieved limited success. Now, a multinational research group suggests that new thinking is required to get kids moving. Instead of focusing on motivation, they say it's better to expand, extend, and enhance the opportunities kids have to be active, a theory known as TEO. Not only is it more practical, but it's potentially more effective. In TEO, there are 3 categories of change. Expansion refers to carving out new time for physical activity, such as adding activity into academic classes or before or after school. Extension extends the amount of time already devoted to physical activity, such as lengthening recess or increasing the number of PE classes for students. And enhancement means improving the quality of an existing activity. Some examples include reducing wait times during PE or making more equipment available during recess. Each category makes sense intuitively and is backed by evidence. For example, the research team points to a trial evaluating a girls' after-school dance program. Participants got significantly more physical activity on days when the program was offered compared to days it was not. The difference was simply presenting the opportunity. Similarly, it has been shown that kids will take more steps when recess is longer. And when PE teachers are given additional training to enhance the rigor of their lessons, children get about 10% more activity. Some of the most dramatic improvements are observed when these approaches are combined. These findings suggest that interventions aimed at getting kids to make the right choice and be active are largely ineffective. The reality is that adults control how active children are. School principals decide how long recess is, PE teachers choose how intense lessons are, and parents determine whether there's enough time or money to do outside sports. While it will still be a challenge to boost physical activity with this approach, the research team argues that formalizing TEO can improve the design of future interventions and ultimately result in healthier, more active kids.